So we lost that camera. Derek was telling me whenever they were moving one of these little runners. I don't know. Derek was telling me they're trying to. He's trying.
You should not talk about. People know where.
Hi. I'm going to call the meeting to order, and we do have a quorum today also as well. It's about 1:53. Sorry, we are running late because of our previous meeting. So we're going to start our meeting today. Welcome, Colin. We don't have anybody for citizen address, so go ahead, Colin. All yours. Oh, I'm sorry. We have to approve the minute from the last meeting. Any question, correction? If not, entertain a motion to approve. Second. All in favor, signify by aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion pass. Thank you.
I think we're just waiting on the slide deck. 1 second.
No, where I was supposed to sit, sorry.
Welcome. Yes,
Yeah, those who don't know me,
welcome to our team.
welcome. Thank you. I saw the look about it.
Well, if you have any question or explanation or all that stuff, I will refer you to the CEO. She'll explain it for you.
Will do.
Thank you. Welcome. Go ahead, Colin, please.
I'm waiting on the slide deck.
Okay. We're waiting. You want to sing or anything?
I absolutely not.
We need another first pitch.
So how's the Cowboys? Didn't have it switch. Oh, I just have the agenda. Oh, there you go.
Keep scrolling.
Oh, go slides. You can't go up and down. Sorry. We have it. Go ahead. Yes.
All right, I'll start walking through this while we're working on it. So we'll start out where we do every time, which is bringing back the risk register from the last meeting. Hey, there we go, just in time. So Will is actually going to come back today and provide an update on the managed security services, which was 1B of my priority wish list. The other was the Epic Cloud migration, which we just discussed in the board meeting, so I can start sleeping at night when those two things get done. That's an exciting time for us. The risk priorities for fraud, waste, abuse, misconduct, the critical care coding and billing, Company 600 and 99490 have all been mitigated to the point where they're dropped off and no longer need to appear on the risk register. So I will let Will here in a minute talk about CrowdStrike, CTAC, and managed security services. He's got some slide deck. I'll jump down to the JPS risk priorities, which I have listed right now as inpatient short stays and the MSDRGs with more than 96 hours of mechanical ventilation. And just a reminder as where risks come from. This is the report on Medicare compliance. It's a weekly publication that we get in the compliance office. I'll circulate this for you. You can take a copy with you, which is primarily some fraud, waste, and abuse topics usually that are occurring in the healthcare space. And in this particular issue, these two items were listed with some associated settlements. some healthcare organizations, so we populated it on the risk register and decided to take a look. I don't think these are going to be issues for JPS because of our design around the 2 midnight rule, specifically for short patient stays. As Dr. Pitar would probably know, it's not going to be an issue for us. Our workflow contemplates all of the documentation we would need to justify a short stay, and we also have very few short stays here, just based on patient population and a number of other factors. So I don't anticipate that's going to be an issue, but it's still part of a new audit. And then the ventilator with 96 hours, I also don't think is going to be an issue here, but we are going to take a look at it.
Why is short stay?
That is a way to goose your reimbursement. So if you're taking an outpatient and calling them an inpatient, technically speaking, they should be here and cross 2 midnights in order to be an inpatient. In this particular instance, we've discharged them usually within 24 hours.
Billing fraud by calling a short stay a inpatient.
Correct.
You get reimbursed more for an inpatient stay versus an observation stay.
Coding some more.
Yes,
I mean, it seems like that and 2 midnight rule are the same thing.
pretty close, yeah. This is one of the sorts of frauds that would go along with the 2 midnight rule.
Okay.
Between inpatient and observation and all that stuff going on.
I'm frozen, Lonnie. Oh, there I went. There you go.
All right, so my friend has asked me on a regular basis to come up and give updates associated with recent events.
Here in the
cyber
Governance
world.
and IT Committee.
Yes, yes. So if you've heard this before, I apologize. Bear with me. So ancient history, we go back to July of this year, and we talk about the event that happened with CrowdStrike, where it pretty much brought a good portion of the world to its knees, about $8.5 million Windows users. CrowdStrike, if you're not aware of it, is a security platform providing services. They had a failure within one of their tools, their Falcon sensors, and the irony of it is that is a sensor that's put out by CrowdStrike to determine when bad guys are trying to come into the organization through endpoints. There was a logic error. I'm not going to go into the technical issues of what transpired, but basically it boiled down to a testing error. The takeaways for us, and DT, this is one of the questions you raised earlier. The takeaways for us is one of the major issues was everybody put their eggs in one basket. We're going to be very mindful of that when we go to the cloud. And in fact, what we're actually doing is so we have two environments. We have a prod and we have a test. And in the primary, we have actually split that into two environments. And in the DR, we split that into two environments. So we're actually going to be in 4 separate Azure regions when we go to the cloud. And we would have avoided that scenario. The second action is incident response planning, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Yep. The second one was the CTAC, and it actually was a ransom. Initially, the Port Authority of Seattle, Tacoma said it wasn't a ransom, but it was a ransom. They decided not to pay the ransom. The implications here were obviously public infrastructure is now targets, and it's targets not just to bring down the capabilities, but it's targets for ransomware. The actions that this presents is actually what transpired is they attacked not only the network, but they attacked individual endpoints, PCs, and a lot of the PCs were old technology. You may note that when you go into an airport, a lot of stuff is still done on dot matrix printers for speed and for cost savings for the organization. Nobody had really thought about the implications of the old technology in relationship to security, not at the server, but at the endpoint side. The second implication here was they really didn't have a incident response plan and hadn't gone through the planning mechanisms because they couldn't make the determination associated with when they were or whether they were not going to pay the ransom. So one of our mitigation steps is focusing on cyber incident training with the leadership team, because there's an operational incident management, but when you have a cyber event, it requires a secondary component at the senior leadership level to be able to actually understand what happened, how we're going to address it, whether we're paying a ransom, and the planning associated with, say, even having a Bitcoin account to be able to pay the ransom if you decided to do that, because it's not something you just pull out of the air, so to speak. So the next several months are going to be a focused effort around cyber incident training around the leadership, really walking through the decision trees, and then doing tabletop exercises in November.
When you mentioned they're using dot matrix, are they going to the RS-232 port, going back out?
I'm sorry.
When you mentioned the airport, they're using the dot matrix printer.
Yes.
Are they going to the RS-232 port to go back in?
Well, I'm sure they were.
They were, okay.
So the other thing I want to bring to your attention is, and this journey has been analogous to the journey from the cloud, and it's been the last 18 months where we've really walked through the process of trying to get a managed security service provider. And that's basically somebody who takes on the bulk of what we do locally. And the intent is not to say we still don't need security, and we're not offboarding security, but what we're really doing is trying to enhance the capabilities. We'll still need security locally to be able to do analysis related to new products, available hands to do deep reviews of problems that may occur. But the bulk of the work effort really will be done by that third party. And that third party is really focused on getting more capabilities and getting the high availability, having true 24/7. So the Finance Committee was helpful about a year ago when we got a contract with Cisco Talos for MDR. And MDR really is the basic level of managed services. We didn't have a 24/7 security operations center. So if something happened, somebody had to wake up in the middle of the night and deal with it. That's been taken care of. If we move to the managed services agreement, and we have picked a vendor, we've gone through the RFP process. I won't name it because I think we're still in the process of notifying the other vendors. I'll be happy to tell anybody afterwards. But we now is the time to go to the MSSP and increase the capabilities. So a lot of this work is done manually in the MDR side, where we have the ability to monitor, detect, and respond. In the MSSP environment, we're starting to apply AI and other technologies so that the speed to recovery, the speed to detect is in milliseconds as opposed to the human aspect of it. The other component of this really is an MSSP gives a holistic perspective, whereas we're looking at various security levels, the endpoints, the firewalls, et cetera. The technology that's brought to bear for MSSP is looking at the world as an ecosystem and managing all the components and constantly assessing that in relationship to the bits and pieces to determine what the overall outcome should be.
And they are all onshore, right?
Yes, all onshore.
Quick question for you on that one. When you have, can you educate with what certification level are they high trust?
Yes, sir.
On that, so they are high trust.
Yes, sir.
Do their staff have to be HIPAA compliant? Go through that HIPAA compliance also as well?
They will. The individuals that we picked has some of the highest security levels. They do DoD work.
So they do. Okay, got it. Mm-hmm. Perfect.
So that's the status. I hope to be able to bring that back to Finance Committee next month, and then we'll be in the process of rolling that out over the next 60 days.
Would you keep your MDR contract with Cisco?
Yes.
This would be another layer of security.
Yes, it is.
But your MSSP is managed in-house. That's not an outside vendor?
The MSSP will be an outside vendor. This is increasing services.
Okay, I just was looking at the second bullet, ability to be managed in-house by the
We
organization.
have that ability. We're not going to take advantage of that ability because, quite frankly, we're having a hard time finding resources to be able to do that work to begin with, which is
You could
one
do
of
it
the-
in-house, but you're going to leave it with
That is correct.
Cisco or somebody else? To be determined?
I can tell you after the meeting.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Thanks. Will.
Thank you.
Have your clicker there. So thank Will for his constant partnership with us. I think especially after the name escapes me now, the pharmacy breach. Change Healthcare. I stopped sleeping and I started talking to Will almost every single day. So we're about to the point where I'm going to start feeling comfortable again when we get our systems. I thought they were protected, and then something like that happens, and you're like, oh, okay.
He's not bringing me breakfast.
I'm not bringing breakfast. All right, so we have a pharmacy update section. So one of the things that might not be, and I'll invite Joy and Stephen up, super intuitive, is that I spent a lot of time dealing with the pharmacy, our pharmacies. It's a heavily regulated area. We got a number of high-level programs, which we're going to run through, and so I thought, hey, now's a good time. Let's bring Joy and Stephen up so you can hear from them directly.
Perfect. Well, it's actually my pleasure to introduce to you today Stephen Schultz. He is our Vice President of Pharmacy Services. I know we all know Nicole Shoquist. She is still here as our Chief Pharmacy Officer, is helping us, of course, strategically with a lot of our initiatives related to pharmacy services. But Stephen, we are lucky enough to steal him away from Parkland. And so he is actually going to provide an overview today about our drug diversion software, where we are with that system, as well as kind of future planning of how we continue to make this a safer place for our patients and our team members. But first, I'll let Stephen say a few things, but I want to highlight a couple of fun things about Stephen if you haven't met him. But besides being at Parkland for 10 years and helping, of course, in their inpatient, their outpatient programs, as well as their hospital to home, which he helped build out and launch at Parkland, he is a D1 collegiate soccer player and I can't put the horns up because I have a daughter at A&M, but from UT Austin, Shannon Fletcher, I see you back there. But he, did all that and was a cowboy, apparently, if that's a thing, at Austin. And was their goalie, and so and still was a pharmacist. So that's impressive. And as a mother of children, I'm like, that's so impressive. But anyways, I'm going to let Stephen talk a little bit more. I don't want to steal your thunder. Tell him a little bit more about yourself, and then we'll talk more about drug diversion.
Thanks, Joy, for the introduction. Like Joy said, my name is Stephen Schultz, and I'm the Vice President of Pharmacy Services here at JPS. I've been here about 6 months, and obviously we'll be over the outpatient, inpatient, and our jail pharmacies. Like Joy said, I came from Parkland, where I served 10 years as the pharmacy director there. I was over the inpatient, the ambulatory surgical center, and our infusion center, and partnered on many programs and helped to set up the hospital home program, the outpatient antibiotic therapy program, as well as worked fun with COVID. So that was a big time. I am originally from Dallas. Like Joy said, I went to the best place on earth at UT. And I have two young sons, and I just enjoy coaching soccer and reading, and whenever I have the spare time, watching the Burnt Orange win. So.
Still number one.
They are, and they're going to stay that way, I think. So.
I have to live with.
I really should not be that cocky, so we'll see. But it's been a long time for us. It's been a long time. So, I do also want to introduce Shaylee Mitchell. We actually just hired Shaylee about a week and a half ago. Shaylee is going to be our new diversion officer. She is a nurse by trade, and also has some background as a pharmacy technician. So that's awesome to have those two skill sets as part of our diversion officer. She comes to us from Weatherford ISD, where she was the director of nursing there. So really excited to have her on the team, getting introduced to all the different teams and departments within JPS. So excited to have her. So as Joy mentioned, we do have a new software system called Century 7, which is an analytics platform that uses machine level learning to identify potentially at-risk individuals and highlight their scores. And they in their system, they call them heat scores. And basically, if you're kind of familiar with some of these systems, they operate on a similar context of standard deviations of the mean. So it's comparing the individual versus their peers in their departmental area areas to highlight alerts and to raise awareness to concerning trends that they want you to investigate. So Sentry 7 is the software we use, and it also allows us to interconnect between a lot of different systems. So it currently receives our Epic data, our Kronos time clocking data, our wholesaler purchase data. It helps to reverse distributors, our automated dispensing cabinets, and through that our C2 Safe, which are central repository of all controlled substances on the inpatient side.
Do your own data mining.
Yep. So far, kind of a quick update on how we're utilizing the system. We just got it handed off to us about on the 10th, and before that we had made sure that all the files were updating. We had done 3 sessions of user training, and then we had started to validate different sections or different alert sections within the software. So there's pharmacy operations, wholesaler shipments, patient deliveries, and the time clock. We are still working on the interface for our ambulatory pharmacies, and we did just go live recently with the Will ambulatory module, so we're still interfacing that portion of the analytics. We're also still working on the infusion side and connecting with the reverse distributor. This is a view, a screenshot. This is not our information, but this is just a screenshot of what the detection dashboard looks like on the Sentry 7 website. If you can see there, I know it's kind of small for your screen, but if you can see there on the left-hand side, you can see the heat scores, and it outlines the highest heat scores and goes through from the highest to lowest of essentially which people you want to look at first from the scoring system. It then in the bottom left-hand corner separates it out by department. On the right side, it's going to alert you to all the transactions that it has fired across the institution and sees as alerts. For y'all's awareness, there's roughly 300 different types of alerts that the system can fire. So it's a lot when you first get into the system, and you really have to spend time validating it and comparing it and seeing, is this actually, a concerning trend, or is this something that's very explainable by the environment? And I'll just give an example. I use the same system at Parkland, and I actually helped set it up. And just to give you guys an example, over there they have the burn department, and there is one nurse who specifically does most of the wound care. Every time that nurse would be number 1 on the list because she's doing the wound care and administering those medications, and based on the alerts, it's firing saying that she is pulling more, opioids compared to her peers. So obviously we would review that and say, yes, that makes sense. We want to see that, but it makes sense. And so you have to work through those types of variances that you see in the system to really get it to full efficiency.
Is that when you train the machine learning?
Exactly. Yeah, and that is the portion of machine learning is telling it whether you treat it as a diversion event or not, and then what you've done from it. So you say, yes, we're investigating this, or no, we would not consider this a diversion event, or this just shouldn't qualify. It's really not data that we would think would actually correspond to any diversion concerns. And with all those alert parameters, those 300 alert parameters, the system typically resolves almost 97% of them. So even though we see quite a bit on our end, it's still doing a lot of comparisons in the background and saying, okay, if you pull, it's going to say, okay, I pulled a controlled substance from the automated dispensing cabinet, alert. It's going to wait until that's administered to then resolve that alert. And so it's doing that all the time from the data that it receives each day.
When you set it up that way, does it detect the false positive out, right?
Exactly, and you say it's a false positive. That's actually an alert that you tell it, and you say this was a false positive.
Is that the algorithm that you configure or you can input into the system, or is it part of AI?
So it'll start off with firing a lot of those alerts until we start telling it they're false positives, and it'll notice a trend and stop showing them over time.
But that's the algorithm that built in.
Exactly, yeah, based on the feedback that we provide and based on our, the human component of the review.
None of this is using AI for language modeling and all that stuff. I want to be careful how we use AI, that's why.
They call it machine learning.
Okay.
I can follow up specifically if they quote it on AI, or if they call it machine learning is what they call it. And so basically it looks for trends that it qualifies as.
And yeah, I would say machine learning would fall into the category of AI. It is a type of AI.
But I want to make sure that we still have control over it.
Sure.
Because the other side, once we cross over to that side, we need to have a policy around it, because I love AI, I love technology, but I just don't trust the language modeling of that can create more problem for us down the road that we thoroughly vet it out. That's why.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And we obviously we want to review as many alerts and all the alerts as possible. And that's part of that review process. And where a lot of the bulk of your time is spent is reviewing those alerts and saying, is this something that is of concern or not? And it's tweaking it. Maybe we need to extend the hours or minimize the hours. There's parameters that we can change. And as we, better see what the system is churning out and evaluating, and then we can continue to build out those parameters.
Is that the same system you're using at Parkland?
It is.
How long does it take for
I don't know if I can say that.
How long does it take for it to be mature once you implement it?
That's a good question. It really depends. In my personal experience, it probably takes between 6 months and a year to really start getting good quality data that is highlighting real, true trends that are concerning. And it really depends upon how good your workflows are at the ground level and how good of information you're feeding it. So we experienced at Parkland examples in which we realized where we were documenting things or where we were pulling into the data was not what we needed. And so we actually did a lot of practice changes associated with utilizing the system because we discovered that there were gaps and opportunities in the operations that we needed to modify to get to where we could use the full capabilities of the system. So it helped to identify operational, functional issues that we could then continue to build upon. And I mean, in my experience with drug diversion, it is those frontline staff members where you get some of the best feedback and the best, tips on where to focus on, right? We want to empower our frontline staff members to make sure they are comfortable raising concerns and escalating concerns and have appropriate, avenues through ethics lines and things like that. Because in my experience, that tends to be where you get the best information, and then you supplement it with things like Century 7 to be able to identify concerning trends and be able to drive into, okay, we're seeing the same thing over and over again with this specific individual. We need to follow up and really maybe we say, okay, we're going to do, a spot check on this individual and try to intervene in the middle of their workday. We see a concerning trend with a specific thing, and we're going to intervene and try to capture it, for lack of a better word, in the act, to be able to help truly, compare and contrast and say, yeah, we're seeing concerning trends, but is this a documentation issue? Is this a timing issue? Is this, they're using the wrong field? Unfortunately, it can range quite a bit of different things, but all the flags, like I mentioned earlier, there's about 300 flags that the system has, and it assigns a numerical score, that heat score that they call. It's the highest evidence of activity to investigate. And then I just included a quick slide from a programmatical overview for drug diversion. We kind of look at it as 3 pillars of drug diversion. You have your core elements, which you focus on your legal and regulatory requirements, and then oversight and accountability, which we have our MDT team, as well as our policies and procedures. From a system level perspective, you have your HR, you have your automation technology, your monitoring, surveillance, and your investigation and reporting, which obviously a lot of that is going to help with our Century 7, as well as the daily activities that we're doing within pharmacy. And then your individual level controls, you're looking at chain of custody, storage, and security. Internal to pharmacy, obviously our own transfer of prescriptions, our purchasing, our wholesaler data. That's also things that the system helps us to track and trend and make sure that all the products that we ordered are being receiving. And that's obviously in addition to the normal audits that we always perform. You also want to look at prescribing and administering trends, and then just from a complete picture, you want to make sure also you're looking at returns, waste, and disposals. So, any questions that you guys have?
Thank you, Steve. I do have a question for you. I'm Dr. Kirby in the emergency room. In your example, you talk about the nurses pulling the meds from the Pyxis. Mm-hmm. Are you also doing a surveillance of prescribing habits of physicians, or is it simply who's pulling the meds?
Yeah, so that's the next steps I think that we need to start getting into is looking and trending those habits. We have the data. The system doesn't look at it as much within Century 7. Century 7 is more focused on the purchasing aspects, the administering aspects. It'll look at like pain scores. We can review non-controls and high cost drugs to make sure those aren't going out of the system. But we can look at Epic data from the prescribing side of things and track and trend on that aspect. Yes, yeah. Pulling, ordering, administering, wasting, returning, that's where it's more focused right now on.
Can you track the use of generic versus brand and the influence of drug reps?
Well, we shouldn't be interacting too much with drug reps, but I'm sure we could track and trend. We have track and trend volume data. We wouldn't necessarily have to use this system for that, but we could see from a purchasing and a ordering perspective. If we see, depending on a certain event, we could see if the ordering increased based on a certain event. I can reference. I know a time back at Parkland, when. What was it? Like tramadol went control in certain, what's the drug I'm thinking of? I can't think of it. It was back in October of around 2015. I just can't remember which drug it was that went control. But basically you could see all the prescribing of the residents switched from the control agent to the non-control agent or from the control agent to the non-control agent because basically one of the meds that they predominantly prescribed went controlled. So you can track things like that and see trending habits, and it does follow kind of logical patterns. I just can't think of that drug. It was.
At some point in the future, can you look at, I guess, generic, but also with to see the effectiveness of certain disease or comorbidity? A certain generic won't work well.
In a certain disease state?
Right.
I guess it depends on how you define work well. From an endpoint perspective, what's the clinical efficacy or what's the resolution of symptoms? It really would depend on quite a bit of factors. But we do for our pharmacy and therapeutics committee, we do use MUEs, they're called medication use evaluations, where we look at some things like that, of how we're utilizing the drug and, if we're getting the efficacy and endpoints that we would want from those experiences. So we do some of those types of reviews through our pharmacy and therapeutics committee.
So what is the, I guess, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 that you envision?
For Century 7? So there's, I think, multiple different aspects that you can enhance within a diversion program. And I have quite a bit of ideas, but obviously we'll have to do it in phases. You have the daily activity of reconciling any polls, any polls, making sure they're administered, waste, and returned. And so that's a daily function that we do. You have that baseline, and then on top of that, you add Century 7 and you look at trends, and you evaluate, okay, so we have a nurse that when they're taking care of this patient, the patient tends to have a pain score of 3, but then when this nurse is here, they have a pain score of 7. Do we have a concern that they are saying they're documenting, providing that pain med, but they're actually not? And so the third step that I kind of envision is, doing things like waste testing and actually being able to try to intervene earlier in the process, not even just necessarily using analytics, but there's some organizations I know who do spot test wasting. So we can see through Century 7 that they documented waste, and we want to account that there was waste documented, but maybe we can also use some testing to actually ensure that that is what they said it was. So there's levels that you can build within the program to really try to consider all aspects of it. So I think each piece rolls into the overall puzzle of how do you build a program on top of already, the diligence that you have from the frontline staff members. So I think, doing things like waste testing would be, I think, a cool thing to implement and another thing to consider.
Let me make sure I get your definition correct. For waste, is that like some medication we get cheaper if we buy it 10 milliliter, but we only use 3 and then we throw 7 away?
Yep.
Is that what you
Yep.
definition?
Yep. Exactly. Yep. So.
Thank you. Any other question?
Yes, sir.
Yes, go ahead. You have a question?
Oh, just one. Does this pull its data directly from Epic?
Yeah, it is a day behind because it pulls from Clarity, but that's obviously why we have our daily reports that we use to reconcile all the admins versus all the pulls versus admins, wastes, and returns to make sure we have accountability from that. But then Century 7 we use to overlay that to look at trends.
Its sole source of data is ultimately Epic.
One of the pieces of data, yeah. It uses Kronos. It uses our wholesaler data. It pulls in a whole bunch of different feeds.
Okay.
But it's yes. I mean, predominantly it's pulling from Epic from the bulk of alerts that it's firing.
What's Clarity?
It's the reporting database that is extracted from Epic. It's Epic.
It's Epic's product.
Yeah.
It's another Epic product. So there's a data delay.
There's a data delay, yeah.
The purpose of this is not waste, it's theft, right? Fraud?
Diversion prevention.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's accountability to the controlled substance. We want to make sure that we know where all of our controlled substances are being used and handled, and we want to make sure that nothing is, leaving our system that, we can't account for, even down to kind of the example, like I said, where, we have a nurse who documents that, and the patient normally has a pain score of 7, but when they're there, they have a pain score of 10. Okay, why is that? What's going on there? Could they, even though they documented that they gave it, could they be potentially pocketing and walking it out? That's where things like Century 7 is helping us to look at.
Okay.
Do you have to deal with cold storage and all that stuff?
Sorry?
Do we have to deal with cold storage and all that stuff with this?
Cold storage?
Certain medication that's cold.
Do you mean like a COVID vaccine, like an ultra cold COVID vaccine?
Certain drugs, you have to keep at certain temperature type thing.
Seems like you can do a lot of.
Does it evaluate? You mean like if we kept it at a certain temperature?
Right.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't look
Doesn't
at
go to
that.
that extent.
Yeah.
It's
But-
scientific for that.
Yeah, we have monitors that we use to track the temperature of our products in transit or if we're ever moving it and in our pharmacies.
I'm just curious, why do you need wholesaler information?
We want to track. Well, one, we want to make sure that we are keeping track of the amount that we're purchasing. So both our wholesalers have an obligation as well as us to obviously manage what we're purchasing and keeping track. And they actually will keep track of if we're having too many purchases higher than a standard deviations of mean, if we are purchasing more than we normally purchase. There's been a lot of, in the past, litigation with wholesalers about making sure that they keep track of what pharmacies are using, what pharmacies are purchasing. So we want to trend that, as well as we want to make sure that everything that we purchase, we receive into our pharmacies to account for that. So there's that normal auditing and frontline perspective, but having this additional level to just track it on a larger perspective. So, and then we have the reverse distribution as well. So what we send back, what we have to expire and waste and send back from a reverse distribution perspective as well, it trends that. I don't have it, but I'm sure we do. Yeah, I can get it.
This is part of the Fit for Growth?
Sorry?
Is it part of Fit for Growth?
Growth, safety.
We're all on top.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, guys. Nice to meet you.
Very bullish on Century 7 and also with Shaylee. She's awesome. I had a chance to interview her. That's good. That's what you want in a diversion officer. I can tell you that right now. All right, Daphne, the show is yours.
Yes, and I will ask Renee Garcia to join me at the table. Oh, I was going to give it to Renee. Okay, give it to Renee. Just want to introduce to this committee Renee Garcia. She's our Enterprise Risk Manager, and she has a team that includes overseeing our legal claims manager, our workplace violence manager. She has an an analyst who works on our policies, and our workers' comp administrator. So they are a small but mighty team, and they are engaged in our overall enterprise risk management for the organization. Their role, of course, is coming up with a strategy for constantly assessing and mitigating our organizational risk, and they work closely with our other departments that are doing ongoing assessment of risk, including working with our compliance team, our clinical risk team, and our district safety teams. This year, the reason we're bringing this introduction forward is that, we were really working to formalize an actual risk management plan for this team this year. And so we are kicking that off. And so we wanted Renee to come and talk a little bit about that. You can go ahead and go to the next slide, Renee. So you're going to hear from her, but I'm just kind of setting up. We really are trying to make sure that we are focusing on risks, not only from the perspective of the entire organization, but we also, similar to what Colin does with his risk register, we look at external risks that our industry is facing, and we kind of marry the two together to come up with our risk management plan, which she's going to tee up for you here in a minute. We really are focused on those last two bullet points of supporting an improved structure for reporting and analysis of risks, and bringing greater awareness to the organization about our risks, so we can enhance our ability to respond and come up with formal plans for how we're going to mitigate against organizational risks. So with that, Renee, I'll ask you to just give a little bit about the framework, and then we'll talk about the timeline.
Thank you. We've adopted the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations Treadway, also known as COSO. It's an enterprise risk management framework that in the American Society of Healthcare Risk Management, risk assessments for enterprise risk management. The framework formalizes the way organizations implement internal controls to help them adhere to business requirements. The COSO framework provides the risk manager with the practical roadmap to move ERM forward, allowing flexibility where needed to protect and create value for the organization. And you'll see on the screen the COSO framework is broken up into 5 components and underlying principles of ERM. The 5 components are the governance and culture, strategy and objective setting, performance, review and revision, information communication, and reporting. And with those 5 components, those are supported by a set of 20 principles that describe practices that can be applied in different ways. The principles in ERM decision-making model will help management and board members understand several important aspects of managing the risk across the enterprise.
You want to move forward with the timeline?
Yeah.
So where we are now is, obviously, we drafted a formal plan, and we introduced that plan to our Executive Compliance Committee. And then we were beginning to initiate the process where we were working with organizational leaders to really understand better their perception of risk for their respective areas. So we've already gotten the plan approved through the committee. We've started that annual risk assessment, and that is an annual basis, so you'll start to see that coming forward. Once we complete that work with that questionnaire and actually take those perceptions of internal risk and match them up against what we know are external or industry-wide risks, then we will prioritize and we will come up with our ERM risk register, which will come back through this committee so that we can track and see how we're really implementing strategies to mitigate those risks for the organization, similar to what Colin does. I didn't want to steal all of your thunder if you want to cover anything on this slide, Renee, but I think where we are right now, we actually are going to extend out a little bit the time for getting those questionnaires back, as with any sort of survey. We didn't get as many responses as we had hoped the first time, and so the team is working over this next week to reach out to those leaders to get those answers back so that we can conclude this work. Then we will start analyzing those responses and again come up with those risk priorities so that we can circulate our action plan. And we intentionally push that down closer to the staff level. So I think you sent those out to mostly directors and executive directors.
Yes.
And then we'll make sure that their perceptions of internal risk kind of match what their leaders think. So we'll give them an opportunity to also layer on their thoughts and then come up with those plans, and you can add anything that I left out in that.
No, I think you covered everything. Thank you.
So will the analysis period be moved since you're still in the questionnaire, right? We're 9:27 now.
Yes.
So that we move on.
Yes, we're going to move it out.
Yes.
Any other questions?
Are you an attorney?
Am I an attorney? No. I do have a paralegal background.
She plays one on TV.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Renee.
We have a few policies for approval. The information blocking policy, which is COM 8700, LD 1000, which is orientation for the Board of Managers, and the internal audit scope and independent policy, LD 9000. And then also 3 that archive. They're being archived because that information was moved and co-located in the corporate compliance program, so there was a redundancy and they're no longer needed. So that's the request for approval and for archive.
The question, Colin, under the information blocking policy, so we already have a policy.
Yes.
This is a modification. And these regulations came out last September, I believe.
I think it was before that. This is part of the 21st Century Cures Act. So it may have been updated, but it's been out for a little while.
There's a defined term on your red line. It's page 30 on our screens. It says workforce members. I didn't see where that was defined. That may be in another document somewhere. What is workforce members?
That would probably go back to the definition that we codified in the corporate compliance program.
Okay. And we dealt with that issue back then. Is this going to be this ties in with that document? Okay.
And define volunteer also as well, right?
Which is, sorry, DT?
Define the volunteer term.
That is correct. Also defined.
Too soon.
Right. Yeah.
All right. If no more questions, may I have the motion for approval?
So move.
Second.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
All right.
And opposed, motion pass. Next item. Are we ready for close? Okay. Do I have to hit this? We're gonna go into executive session in 5 minutes.
Did we vote on both of these at the same time? Is that a motion
Closed
for
session, I
both?
mean. Oh, I have to do it again. Thank you, Dr. Casey, Dr. Kirby, and Dr. Patar. We always this fun, so come back again.